Hi, this is Mary Poul, your host for the Sales Mastery Summit. Tell me, how do you stand out from the crowd? Today's expert has studied what do the best sales performers do that really differentiates them from the rest. With me today is Ben Zoldan, co-author of What Great Salespeople Do, The Science of Selling Through Emotional Connection and the Power of Story. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
My pleasure. Well, we are so curious because salespeople really do face more competition than ever today. And really, it's the ones that can make that connection, just like your book title alludes to, and really differentiate from everybody else calling on the same limited set of buyers. Can you help our viewers understand really how do the best differentiate themselves?
Yeah, Mary, I believe we need to really think differently about that question. I take it really seriously because I think there's a lot of people that struggle with that, and we need to change sort of how we're asking that question and look at it through a different lens. I think I don't think I'm alone in this and how I've been trained to do it, which is my attempts, my whole career had always been to hammer why my company's different, why I'm so different, and I think the way the world had taught me how to do it, I was not connecting with people. I was telling people how great I was, and I sounded like every other salesperson. And I think what Mike and I discovered was there's a better way to connect with people at a human level, and it's just not the way corporate training departments have been teaching us. It's funny. I just came back yesterday from a business trip, and I sat next to a woman who was really chatty, and I was exhausted. So when she asked me what I did on the plane, I tried to scare her off by saying I was a sales trainer, and most people sort of zip it at that point. But she was curious, and she said, "Okay, tell me more." And I didn't have a good answer for her, so I just turned it around, asked what she did, and she owned a jewelry design company, and I was curious about it, so I said, "Well, so tell me about the company." And she told me all about her business, and I was curious, and it was a pleasant conversation. And then she stopped me, and she goes, "Wait a second, but it's different in my business than yours because selling jewelry is different than probably what you train." And I was like, "Huh?" She said, the way we sell jewelry is probably different than the way you train salespeople to sell the services." And I asked her, "So what kind of person would you want to buy from if you were buying your jewelry?" And she stopped and she kind of paused and said, "I would want to buy from somebody who's trustworthy, who's real, who doesn't talk about how great the jewelry is and try to sell me." And then she paused and she said, "I want to buy from somebody who cares." And I was thinking, oh my gosh, is that really different from how we would want to buy anything? And then she stopped and she goes, "That's probably not how you train. You probably train to do all this stuff and you hammer." And she said, "Think of all the salespeople out there." And I don't know. I think at its core, the way to stand out is to be that person. And training departments, I know our old way never taught how to care. I think we taught how to hammer people and hammer people. And I think what Mike and I are trying to do is rediscover a better way to care, a better way to listen, to have people be heard. And when people are heard, it's they want to buy. So that's what Mike and I are on a mission to make selling a more peaceful, gentler way to connect with human beings.
Okay, makes total sense. Now, Mike's previous claim to fame was solution selling, and I know he told me that out of frustration because it seemed like really top 10% players would pick it up and run with it, and the rest just weren't getting it and putting it to use. And out of that frustration, you and he did quite a bit of research into what is it that the top 10% are doing that's so different. So my guess is by your answer previously is that they've really figured out how to let the customers know they care. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We always talked about the 80-20 rule. Some people say it's worse. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. I talked to an executive from Oracle who stopped me and said, "Wait a second, it's not 80-20 over here, it's 90-10. And a few years ago, when Mike and I were, by then solution selling just had a different name on it, which was customer-centric selling. Mike and I were chatting at his house one evening, and we were thinking about the best people that we knew, the best salespeople we knew, and they were always doing something different that we never tapped into. It was never our methodology that they were using that differentiated themselves. In fact, here's a dirty little secret. When I asked Mike about the sales calls he's been on, and he sold solution selling to IBM, multi-million dollar sale, his dirty little secret to me was I never used the 9 boxes. And that's a scary thing when you look in the mirror and you kind of say, wow, what am I doing? And it was kind of like a dominoes effect from there when we started to say, oh my gosh, here we are, we're an industry based on questions, and how ironic is it that we stop asking questions about ourselves? And it was kind of like a stab in our guts, and we're like, let's go explore something. So let's explore this thing. What is he doing so different if we're not using the methodology we're selling? When we asked the best salespeople, it was never the methodology. It was never the 9 boxes or the spin, the questioning. People were doing something different. And if you ask people, as we did, what is it that the best do? Mary, it was always answers like, well, they just have all the intangibles, or they just have the gift, or they have the mojo, or they have this like magical intangible thing. And Mike and I a few years ago were like, something, we've had enough with this. It would be a cop out if the best were doing something so different and we didn't try to explore what it was that was so different. And we began essentially this research project. What is it that the best are really, really doing if it's not all the things that training departments are talking about, including, by the way, our own? And we had to change, and we just sort of left everything we knew, all the truths that we knew we left behind, and started this little research project that became Storyleaders.
So in the course of doing that research, can you share with us how you came to the conclusion that they really have a gift of exhibiting how they care?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, our first step was trying to understand how we all make decisions, how we decide to act, what motivates us, what activates trust in some people, why we don't trust others, how I move from the status quo to something else. And all of the things we were doing were based on logic and reason and ROIs and this intellectual exercise that we loaded salespeople up. And I think one of the things we discovered was that's not how our minds work. And we began this 2-year research project on how our minds work, and it undermined everything we knew to be true about sort of how we decide to act, how we're motivated to act, how we make decisions, i.e. how we buy. And we always had a hunch that we bought for emotional reasons and justified them later. I mean, my wife certainly was the first to tell me that we don't buy from logic. But when we really sort of lifted up the hood and looked at that, we realized that we had this very left brain logical way of selling. This diagnose prescribe model was based on here's a problem, here's a solution. Here's the right answer. And I think the thing that undermined the whole premise of our old methodology was that's not how we buy. We buy from people based on these deeper beliefs. And then how do we communicate beliefs to people? And people buy and sort of let go of their paradigms and move into something new based on sort of connecting with another human being. And the biggest thing that just threw us for a loop was this idea that we know to be true now based on the new breakthroughs in the neurosciences, which is the bigger the decision, the more we need to have emotional weight behind that. And we have to have an emotional connection with the people trying to influence us. And we started to examine what is it going to take to have people make these emotional decisions. And when you start to ask that question, all roads begin and end with the word story. And how stories move people, how we move based on an emotional sort of sense of a decision compared to a logical way. And
so back to your the best just have some sort of mojo, that they're special gifts. A lot of us know people that are just naturally gifted storytellers. So have you figured out a way to teach those of us that don't have that mojo naturally how to become a great storyteller?
Yeah, well, and it was a pretty tough one for me because when Mike and I began this journey 4 years ago, Mike was always a great storyteller, and people always loved Mike. And you always hear, the best storytellers win, the best leaders are storytellers, the tribal leaders were storytellers. Stories make us listen, stories inspire us. We know that intuitively when we go to the movies, or we can't put down a great novel. We remember stories, we forget the facts, all this stuff. Well, it freaked me out because Mike was always a great storyteller. And I asked Mike, how'd you become a great storyteller? Over a glass of wine one evening, and he said, well, gosh, it was how we orally, transferred information to my family. My grandmother was a great storyteller. And I'm thinking, well, I didn't have that storytelling, growing up. And I wanted to learn, well, then how would an average person like me learn to go from this left brain sort of approach to storytelling? And one day I stumbled across this quote from Daniel Siegel, which was, it's something that's in our DNA. We are wired to listen to stories, to learn from stories, to all be storytellers, and it's in all of us if we just rediscover it. And I was encouraged and wanted to learn more. And one of the things we know is that by the time we're adults, we've heard and learned thousands and thousands of stories. It's how we make sense of the world through the 200,000 years of evolution. Since we've been walking on 2 feet, we've transmitted all of our lessons learned through stories. In fact, we had stories long before we had language, and we've evolved to be story learners and storytellers. It's in all of us. And I think one of the things a big aha moment for us was, the last 20, 30 years of corporate training and this age of logic that's made its way into corporate training departments and sales methodology, we've knocked it all out of us. And I think one of the things that Mike and I have discovered is we can rediscover what's innate. It's something we all have if we just sort of rediscover it. And I think one of the things that Mike and I are now really interested in is what gets in the way of real, authentic, meaningful storytelling. And that's messy work. It's being vulnerable. It's being open. It's being real. It's tapping in. It's having a language of emotion. But it's one of the things that's been lost in corporate America is that the emotional storytelling. And that's this kind of stuff that we're doing in our workshops, is trying to really tap into that. And it's moving, it's inspiring when we do.
Ben, do you have a framework that you help people through so that they can bring the storyteller back out of themselves and know that they're spinning something compelling that doesn't feel like PowerPoint bullet points? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. It takes a lot of work, and Mike and I were creating this model from scratch because there wasn't this model. There's all these sort of moving pieces, because when you talk to storytellers, I think some of the things that you would hear that we heard were it's about real, truthful stories. It's about authenticity. It's about looking within and seeing the things that make you tick, and those are the people who share the stories, right? And for us, I think one of the things we discovered is there's a universal framework for stories out there. There's a story arc. There's a way to tell stories, but it's really a search, really a discovery process of looking within. And a lot of people go through our workshops and they go, "Oh my God, this is like therapy," and searching out your stories. And it really is. It's really a search for what are the things that make you tick, and search out those personal stories, and then you become a storyteller. And that's what we're doing. We have a lightweight framework. It's not heavy duty, but it's a way for people to really sort of gain the courage to tell their stories of who, what makes up who people are. And when you do that, you sort of start to search out the stories of why you do what you do. Why do we do what we do? And I think our story is one about giving salespeople the permission to share their stories from the heart, and move people and inspire people and share lessons learned. And it's not as much about this framework as just really sort of having the permission to share stories. And here's the amazing thing, though. I'm not interested in storytelling for the sake of storytelling. I'm interested in the effects of storytelling. And the amazing thing is, just like we did at the campfire, when you share a story, what happens? If you're sitting around a campfire and one person tells a story, what's the next person going to do?
Build on it, add their own.
Absolutely. And It's really, that stories are not the ends. It's really the means to open up and get another person to share their story. And if we can share a story from the heart, a vulnerable, sort of a let it go story about ourselves, other people will tell a story about themselves, and stories beget stories. And I think the most valuable lesson I learned is if we can become storytellers, we actually become incredible listeners. And what a great gift for salespeople that you can share stories with the goal to pass the torch to another human being and have them tell their story. And when people feel like they're listened to and that their voice matters, their stories matter, they connect. And when people connect with another human being, they let their guard down. They say, look within, and they start to sort of say, I'm going to let go of my paradigm and I'm going to buy what you're selling. But when people are doing this and hammering and diagnosing and prescribing and ROIs and telling why we're the best, we don't buy from those people. We know that. So I think the biggest lesson for me is if we could share a story, we get another story in return. And what a gift for salespeople. Actually, I take that back. What a gift for people who buy from salespeople if they believe their story is important.
Excellent. So for any of our viewers that are thinking, well, I'm not sitting around a campfire, I am conducting business. And so, for those viewers that are feeling like this is a bit kumbaya, can you work how storytelling really fits into the sales process and how you work with sales reps to tell their corporate story, their product story, and mine out the story of their customers?
Yeah, I mean, I come from selling, B2B information technology, and a salesperson, goes in and is really tasked to get a buyer to open up and share their pains, their issues. I don't know. I just like to think about that a little bit different, which is what if we just go out there and get somebody's story? How would one do it? Because if we get somebody's story, it would be a story of struggle. How is somebody struggling? We would need to go first, right? People don't open up with others that they don't trust. They open up with people they trust, which means we as salespeople, as an industry, need to go first and be vulnerable and open up. And what if we start sharing our struggles first? Sharing the stories of our company, sharing the stories of why I do what I do as a salesperson. And if we could think through the story of who I am and I could share that, or I could think through the story if I worked for Oracle, what is the real Oracle story? How did we struggle? And we can start sharing the stories of how we struggle. I think it would change how people think of that word story. Stories are not about, let me tell you how we help somebody. Like we're hiding behind it, Mary. I think story, we taught that in solution selling 30 years ago. Share a story about how you help somebody. And all that is chest pounding. And no wonder why buyers don't open up to us. And I think what we found is if we could reorient stories around struggles, have people think about, here is how we messed up. Here is how we were dummies and we didn't know any better, but we cared, so we came out the other end. Here's what we learned along the journey. I think one of the most incredible things we do in our workshops is we help people think about messaging their company in a story. What's the story arc, right? How did we start? How did we struggle? And how did we come out the other end? And if we do that, we're really sort of telling the world how we're imperfect. And it takes a lot of courage for salespeople to sort of open up sales calls with, here's our imperfection. But when we do, then buyers will reciprocate. We know that neurobiologically that we mirror. When we go in like this, we're the best. Buyers say, well, I'm the best too, i.e., have any problems, I don't need to buy anything from you. So I think one of the biggest things that we do is help people think about the stories of their struggles, because we identify with struggles, and it takes a lot of work to build a story around here's how we've messed up versus here's how we're so great.
I think that's a brilliant point you just made, that most of us know. I hope all of our viewers know that we do naturally mirror each other, that our brains are wired to help us feel compatible with somebody else by mirroring them. So if your goal as a sales rep is to go in and find out what your customers' greatest challenges are, what their most critical needs are, and be vulnerable to you, if you're going in telling them how great you are and you can solve all problems and then expecting them to open up and be vulnerable, there's just a natural mismatch there. So it makes sense that you can't get to that end result if you're starting out with how great you are.
I think the world told us to be superhuman, and we became figureheads for the companies we work with. And buyers don't connect with that. Buyers connect with the imperfection. That's why you love the movies with and root for the underdog. We're neurobiologically wired to mirror imperfection and to go like this to perfection, because that's not truthful. I get reminded of it every day in my personal life. Can I share a quick story with you?
Absolutely.
So I don't know if anybody has young kids out there, but I have a 10 and a 12-year-old, and I could tell you at dinner time, it's hard to get them to open up. It almost feels like a bad sales call. It's like, sweetie, how was your day? Good. What'd you do? Nothing. And it's kind of like a sales call when we pepper prospects with questions, and it's down to one-word answers. And just the other day, I had a big screw-up where I texted on my iPhone a little nasty message to my mother about my future brother-in-law. And as I hit send, it actually went to my brother-in-law.
Oh, no.
I'm like, no, come back. I can see the bar on the iPhone, sort of sending. And I was really, really embarrassed. It was just a bad faux pas, and I didn't know what to do. But at dinner that night, it was the same all. We were at a restaurant, my wife and my 2 kids, and I was asking the kids, how was the day? And the scrapes of the fork, it was good. What'd you do? Nothing. It was the same stuff. And for some reason, it dawned on me, I need to get my girls to open up. So I go, does anybody want to have a who had a dumber day contest? And the minute I said that, my girls look up and go like, yeah. And I told them the story how I screwed up with my brother-in-law. Right? I told them the story about how I inadvertently sent this text about him. And they were cracking up. They thought it was so funny. And I was done with my little story about how dumb I was. And then my oldest daughter goes, let me tell you how dumb I was today. I'm like, what? And then she went about how she did something stupid. And then my youngest daughter went. And it made itself around. And my wife then talked about how she forgot to go to jury duty. And we're all laughing and we're all sort of opening up about how dumb we are. And it was probably the best, most sort of connecting night. And it reminded me, because it's hard to do all this stuff in life, and it reminded me how we all connect through the imperfections. And all we were doing was telling stories about how dumb we were, but connected with each other. And now, every night at dinner, when we're all together, guess what my daughters ask for before we start eating?
Storytelling. Dumb things that happen.
It's even better. My 9-year-old starts it with, it's either, can we tell stories, or better yet, it's like, who wants to go first, who has a dumber day contest? But that's the stuff we connect with. I think about that all the time when I think of sales calls, because I know that sales calls are just like it is with our kids. How was the day today? Good. What'd you do? Nothing. That's how we treat buyers, that we pepper them with questions. They give us the Heisman. They're down to one-word answers. And then buyers, out of discomfort, say, stop asking me so many damn questions and tell me what you do. And the salespeople fire up the laptop and go to town on a PowerPoint deck. And Mike and I want to change that. It's like a crime, and Mike and I are so committed. I mean, think of Mike now. Mike spent 30 years teaching this old way, and so many people struggled with it because it was this diagnosed, prescribed model. It was, let me ask you questions about how flawed you are. Buyers are going like this, and we're trying to change what corporate America is doing, because people, to us, Mary, it's not about storytelling. To us, it's about how do we connect with other human beings and at a deeper level, and the stories are meaningful, and the stories require us to sort of go, oh my God, I need to be emotional. Oh my God, I need to be authentic and real and vulnerable. And when we do that, we have the courage to do anything. And people want to buy from people like that. It goes back to the flight I had with that chatty woman. She said, I want to buy with somebody who doesn't talk too much, who actually listens, who's real, and somebody who cares. And I think story is just a vehicle to do that.
Perfect. So, Ben, my understanding of the story arc is your main character or hero is humming along happy through life and hits some major crisis or challenge and goes through struggle, hits bottom, maybe finds a mentor or something, catalyst that gives them a new outlook, a new way of doing things, and then rises to triumph.
Yeah.
Kind of the classic hero story.
Yeah, so as you're talking about that, it can become really esoteric. I mean, if you read Joseph Campbell's stuff, The Hero's Journey, it can be really tough, and it can throw people into a loop, especially for salespeople. We're just trying to say, okay, how can I tell these short stories to prospects? How can I tell a 3-minute story about my company or about
Yep.
myself or about lessons learned? And I'm going to show it. This might be a little weird for your viewers, but give me 4 seconds and I'm going to get something that I'm going to show you on the screen.
Okay.
So in our workshops, we just want to give a lightweight framework for salespeople to think about developing a story. And here it is.
Okay.
If you can see that. And all that is these little boxes in this storyboard. And we just say these 4 elements. How does something start? What's a challenge? Was there a turning point? How did the story resolve itself? And we actually spend time using that storyboard in our workshops where people create a story about their company. And if you think about this is a little corny, but it's really cool. If you think about this storyboard, I could start, if you look at the bottom left, it's how did the story begin? Well, my company began with this idea of this person. And then you can see the story arc. Well, the story progresses with us hitting a brick wall. We were flawed. Mm-hmm. And then it sort of, the flaw climaxes and then we resolve itself. Go to our website at storyleaders.com and you could download one of those storyboards, but it's just it's like a self-prompting little guide to develop stories. And a story is just the expression of how something changes in life. And something changes in life just like that little arc changes, right? Something starts, I have a problem, the problem gets worse, and it climaxes and I have to do something about it, and then I resolve itself. Mm-hmm. And it's a tool, really, I believe, to be self-reflective. I'm going to tell you a story about myself. Where I started off here, I cared about something, so I started Storyleaders because I believed that, my struggles I wasn't alone. So I set off with Mike to begin this Storyleaders project. We start off on this journey and we struggled. We didn't know how to do it. We were dummies. We were human. We thought we knew it all, but we really didn't. And then we finally sort of had this aha moment that really what it was about was this, and we've come out the other end knowing that it's not just about stories, but it's about a search from within, and we've come out with this 3-day workshop where we teach salespeople how to sort of be self-examining and how to listen and how to reveal themselves, and that's what Storyleaders is. And the reason I use me as an example is that's actually the story leader story. And what I found now is I share that with executives on sales calls all the time. And you know how they respond to it?
How?
They say, Ben, thanks for telling me your story. Let me tell you mine. And I get to shut up and listen because that's what we do with stories. We shut up and listen. And the good news is I went first and I was vulnerable and I said, yes, I didn't know it all. It's just a story, and they'll respond with their story of their struggles. And when story sharing happens, it's like connections happen and we trust each other.
Well, I like too that you didn't have to ask a question and drag it out of them. They offer it up. So it really is more trust building and bonding.
Yeah. How about this? What if we change sales calls to story sharing as opposed to the diagnose prescribe model? And if anybody knows Dr. Daniel Siegel out there, who's this kind of who's who in the new neurosciences and psychology, and is a medical doctor, he's written all these wonderful books. He explains in this book about how the diagnose prescribe model is actually a pathway to disconnection because we feel interrogated, and how a collaboration of sharing stories is how we connect with each other. And why can't we treat sales calls that way? In fact, isn't that how we all connect, whether it's at the dinner table with our kids, the campfire with our friends? I'm going to Mike's wedding in 2 days and all of us are going to be together. At dinner, guess what we're all going to be doing?
Sharing stories about your wedding.
Yeah, and something, we're not going to be diagnosed prescribing each other.
Right.
I know that intuitively when I go home, Mary, and my wife has a problem, I try to diagnose it. All she wants to do is share what happened, and I do too, and we start sharing. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, a lot of people sort of get weirded out by the things we're talking about, and that's fine with us, but a lot of people struggle with the old model. Mike and I care deeply about offering this better way to think about selling. And I don't know, it's kind of weird for me because I know you have a lot of people, so-called sales experts on your own panel. Mm-hmm. And Mike's been like the guru in sales methodologies. We're trying to change it. It hasn't worked. It never has. It never will. If the old models worked, you would expect a shift away from the 80-20 rule. And we're trying to really help improve the lives of salespeople by bringing the humanity back into this thing. And I care deeply about it. And some people do and some people don't.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that storyboard too, because I didn't want to give people our viewers the impression that you have to set yourself up as a loser. The storyboard really takes you through, the setting, the complication where you struggled a little bit and got to resolution, so you can tell the full story. So you're not, just laying all of your weaknesses on the table when you meet, a new prospect.
Right.
It's really to make yourself vulnerable, give them a chance to know you better. And then, like you said, they reciprocate with their own story. So it's not just your failings or the dumbest thing I did in the business setting. You've got that opportunity to really bring the story full circle.
Yeah. I mean, we talk about that in the book. But if somebody just wants to download just a simple little thing, they can go to our website and download that storyboard. And one of the things we do in workshops is, have people get comfortable with just a simple storyboard, how to formulate their ideas in a storyboard. And then we have them build an inventory of 4 basic types of stories. The first one is everybody should have a story about themselves, which means a story about how they've screwed up, story about their company, story about customers, and then just an inventory of personal stories about lessons learned. And they leave our workshops with those inventory of stories. But I think more importantly, what they leave with is really using stories to get other people's stories. And I think one of the things our clients have found, our early clients have found, is they're salespeople now. The mission of a salesperson on a first sales call is not to tell a story. It's to tell a story, to get a story. And salespeople come back now with, it's really, what is the story of your prospect? And when you have a story, they're going to have a reason to change. When you don't, there is no story of change. We even teach salespeople, come back and document your buyer's story. And if you have a real story there, there's a reason they'll change. If you don't, i.e., Mary, let me see if I understand your story. Your story is you started off as a CIO and things were good, and then you acquired a bunch of companies and things got really bad and really challenging, and now things are sort of overwhelming in your IT department, and there's all these silos, and you're frustrated, and you don't know how to get out of this mess, and the other business units are hammering you to change, and you have these SOX compliance mandates, and you're not getting home to see your daughter's softball games at night because you're working 15 hours a day, and you believe in change and you're looking for a way out of this mess. That's a story. And if we could send salespeople off to get that kind of story, those are the people we sell to. And we know this, the people where I'd ask your viewers that, think of the sales you've made in the past. When you have a person's story, do you sell to them? And when you don't have a story, we never sell to those people. We're not connected with them. We don't know their story.
That makes perfect sense. Do you have a favorite story of your own of a client that has really benefited from this approach?
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a great question. And it's more than salespeople, which is weird because I come from sales, and that's how I got into sales training. From, I was knocking on doors when I was 22. I followed the model they gave me. I believed in the model, which was Mike's model at the time, and so much that I got into sales training. And I've always trained salespeople, and I'm working with a company in New York, Cablevision, where we trained at the end of 2011, we trained about 200 of their salespeople over the course of 2 months. And the president, who I didn't know at the time, of this company sat in on one of the workshops. We had like 6 workshops, and he sat in and he said, he came in on the morning and he said, this is cool stuff, but those are salespeople. And then he came back at the end of the workshop and he's like, oh my gosh, something different is happening. Like, people just are different. They're transforming. And he said, Ben, maybe this isn't just for sales, but maybe this is for everybody. Maybe it's for leadership too. And we started to talk about it. Maybe selling is the same thing as leading and managing people. And it's about connecting with other human beings. And he said, can you do a workshop, the same workshop, for my direct reports, all the C levels, the CIO, the VP of finance, non-salespeople? And we did it. And I don't think I knew what to expect. We did this in January, and I don't think he knew what to expect. His name was Dave. And we trained his direct reports, which were only 7 C-level executives. And it was an amazing thing that we're doing the workshop and people are telling their stories. And it's like people started to get to know each other at a different level. These are people that worked with each other for literally 10 years and didn't know these stories about each other. And there was all this friction and silos between the CIO and the VP of marketing and the VP of sales. And like all the walls came down. And what I realized was this is not just about sales. And this company, it's like all the barriers came down now. And what was interesting was, it was the CIO and the VP of marketing and the VP of finance and the VP of operations. After the workshop, they came back and said, Ben, can you actually do the workshop for everybody in our company? And I tell that story to people, and they're like, "Good for you, Ben. You make all this money right now. You train 500 people instead of 200 people." And I'm like, "Yeah, that is good for me, but you know something? Better for them that these people get to connect at a human level and thrive with each other." And I asked Dave like why he did what he did, because he invested a lot in Storyleaders, and he said, Ben, here's the deal. Here's what I now know to be true. This has made our people happier. And if we're happier and a customer calls us, customers will be happier, period. And all the results will take care of themselves. And I'm thinking, everybody is happier. It's a more connected place. And to me, that's like it's a story that I think that's why Mike and I do what we do.
Well, as you said, it's a life skill that we just need to reawaken in our DNA. And since we do all have it within us, I'm sure that some people still struggle as you're starting to work with them. What trips people up as they try to really adopt this style and find their own story and share it?
Well, I think the things that trip people up are the things that trip me up all the time. I do this for a living and fall off the wagon all the time. I talk about listening and sharing stories and being vulnerable and emotional. And I find myself going back to my old scripts of boom and boom. And, and I think the more people that do this together, the more we catch ourselves and remind ourselves that this is hard work. And it reminds me how necessary the work is. And the neat thing is, in Storyleaders now, we kind of have a little tribe of, there's probably a couple thousand of us who have been trained in it. I think I've been trained in my own methodology. And we talk to each other and we just remind ourselves, because we're more introspective now. We remind ourselves of our mistakes and we catch each other and we listen to each other. And it's just easy to fall off the wagon. It's easy to go to the old models and to stop listening. But the cool thing is we teach not just storytelling, but listening, empathic listening in our workshops. I stop listening all the time, but then somebody catches me, and then I start listening. And it's like a self-fulfilling thing that's really cool.
Okay. Well, and since it's a life skill, not just a selling skill, it's something that you can practice in your everyday life, like you said you're doing with your spouse and your kids. So it sounds like a good tip to help us catch those old scripts and replace them is simply to get, people on board helping you catch yourself when you run into those old scripts so that you can get back into listening mode and connecting emotionally.
Right. But it's like a self-auditing thing. When I'm around other people, I was at a brand new client of mine, big IT company, everybody's scared of, and I was meeting with these new executives in preparation to do this keynote I was supposed to do, and they all start yelling at each other. Nobody's listening, and I realized how contagious that was. And I found myself not listening and yelling, and I couldn't get out of that cycle. And then I'm with my clients who have all been through sort of the training, and they started to self-correct. And I think what I realized was the more people that do this work, that have this dialogue, the more it's going to be self-correcting. And we're not going to operate in a vacuum. So the more we just need to do the stuff, the more we need to increase the dialogue around compassion and empathy and listening and storytelling. And every time I feel like I want to argue something, heck, this morning the Supreme Court just ruled on the Obamacare, and at first I was like, oh my gosh, what if they overturn it? And if all you right-wingers out there don't like me, that's fine. But I was thinking, oh my God, what if they overturn it? What a sad day. And I want to argue with those people. And I had to remind myself, just tell a story. Because if I tell a story, they won't put up their defenses. They'll listen to me and they'll take in my point of view. And it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong, because it's just a story. And then somebody else will share a story and I will listen. Mm-hmm. And maybe nobody's right. And this whole right or wrong model goes away. So I just remind myself all the time, share a story. It's a better way to communicate.
I love it. And it comes to mind for those of us that might struggle with the diagnose, prescribe as our script, that replacing the questions you ask to diagnose with questions that help people engage in their own story is one way that you can kind of switch out that behavior.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole thing. And, we spent a whole day out of 3 days in our workshops on just the listening model. Because I think one of the blocks is when people are talking, we formulate sort of a label in our head of what we're hearing, and we label it and we stop listening, and then we pepper another question. And, one of the things we learned about listening is to really sort of, forget about the future, the past, and be present and really listen to people. Really listen with our eyes, too. What are people emoting and feeling? And let's go to emotions as opposed to all this left brain stuff. And questions we're learning can be a really dangerous thing. I know that's crazy for a lot of people to say because the sales industry has been based on questions.
Yeah.
You look up, if you go to Webster's and look up in the thesaurus words for questions, the synonyms for questions will be interrogate, debate, argue. I mean, we don't respond well to questions, yet for sales we've been teaching questions. But maybe there's things other than questions that will really sort of create real listening. Mm-hmm. And those are the fun things we're doing in the workshops that we do about teaching, not just storytelling, but real listening. And sometimes you can't ask questions. It's hard to do.
So, Ben, as we wrap up, do you have any recommendations on how you can really affect change with individuals or even with a whole class?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do and to affect real change. That's number one. But I think we could begin by having people search out their stories. I want to resist the urge to plug my book or plug my workshop. For me, before my workshop, I didn't have it, so it took me $10,000 of therapy in 3 years to do it. And I think one of the things that your viewers can do is think of a story about a mistake you made and share it with a loved one, and just kind of sort of pause and just sort of feel what the other person is, how the other person's connecting with you, and ask them to tell you a story in return. And I think people will get turned on to the emotional connection of storytelling and real listening. So just start to think of stories of struggles as opposed to stories of how great you are, and do that with people you love first, and you'll begin to feel the effects of it.
Well, and the amazing thing is that those stories of struggle are what are going to help you act like and become a best performer.
I think it's what the best do. They have the courage to be imperfect, and we're trying to give that gift to everybody else, have the courage to be imperfect. I knew a great storyteller who was a CEO of a client of mine, and people always said, well, he always talked about he always was vulnerable. He would always sort of admit his flaws and share stories about his struggles, and people would always say, well, he's like that because he's the CEO. He could do that because he's the CEO. And my question out of them is, maybe that's not the case. Maybe he's a CEO because he's like that.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Ben, for helping us with really what's one of the most important skills we can have in life. So the top 10% performers are going to have a lot more competition out there now. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
And thank you to our viewers for tuning in and investing in your own success. The Sales Mastery Summit is here to help you never stop learning from the best. Take care.